Overcoming obsessions and compulsions. The relationship between obsessions and compulsions is a very interesting topic. And I'm here to present to you today some psychoeducation which has been inspired by Reid Wilson. My name is Amanda Dunas and I'm from the Positive Thinking Clinic. And quite often, certain individuals may come in complaining about obsessions that they are experiencing or compulsions that they feel the need to act out. And so the very first thing that we need to do is education. For when we educate one another, we then gain a level of understanding. And when we understand why something is occurring or why we need to change what we are currently doing or what we are thinking, then this understanding gives us the power to make the change. And so obsessions, what are they? They are repetitive, negative thoughts, images, or impulses. This leads to distress. And this distress may come in the form of anxiety, fear, disgust, and even shame. And this then leads to compulsions, such as repetitive thoughts, images, or actions. And then this leads to relief, where the distress subsides temporarily. But do you see the unhealthy relationship here? Now, some symptoms may include washing hands over and over, checking and repeating. For example, is the stove off, or did I turn off the iron? Did I lock the doors? Ordering, always reorganizing your cupboard or your desk or the kitchen. Hoarding and collecting any items, could be clothing, it could be appliances, magazines. The list is endless. Or even thinking rituals, and this can be very emotionally exhausting. And then there's worries and pure obsessions. It's best to consider over the last month or so, how many hours per day is actually spent with these symptoms. Quite often when we don't sit and consider to analyze our pattern or to look at it more clearly, then we can't answer. We may say, oh, I'm not sure, or not long, or all day, or every second day. But it's really important to keep track. If you want to seek help and if you want to stop what you're obsessing about and what you're overthinking about, then it's really important to learn your behaviors. Otherwise, you'll be talking about them globally. And we all know that when we speak more specifically, we can narrow in and then we can create certain small goals so we can find ourselves onto a healthier path. So what can you do? You can write a list of situations that cause you distress or that cause you anxiety or even the urge to ritualise. And you can order this list in place, in order of less distress to most distress. So that way it's like an incline where the things that don't distress you too much are right at the top, and at the bottom of your list it just gets worse, unless you do the list horizontally, of course. You can also write down thoughts, images, or impulses that provoke your distress. And again, I encourage you to place them in order of less distress to most distress. You can write down what your feared consequences are of not avoiding or ritualizing from the above two lists. How distressed it would be for you, and how much do you believe that such consequences will happen? So it's like a reality check. And by placing things in an order, it clearly outlines what's not so distressing and what is importantly distressing for you. It gives you a clear picture of what situations that you avoid and that you allow yourself to feel safe in. So the sequence of OCD symptoms are the evoking event, which then leads to the obsessing, which then leads to distressing, and of course anxiety. And then this leads to the urge to create a ritual. And from there, you continue ritualizing, it becomes a habit. And from there, you find your relief and your self-criticism, because truthfully, you're not happy with having to run this whole process just so that you can find some relief. It's like you're forced into the ritual. Now let's look at some challenges. One of them can be where you become determined to conquer your problem. Another is to gain the perspective that your worries are irrational. Because when you're stuck in this way of thinking, you actually find good reasons to worry, and you somehow can convince yourself that your worries are rational. So that's why it's a challenge for you to gain the perspective that your worries are irrational. Consider that ritualizing is not the only way to reduce your distress, because up until this moment, you have been ritualizing so that you can find some relief. But there are other options so that you can find some distress, so that you can break that pattern of ritualizing. You can accept your obsessions instead of resisting them. It can become so exhausting fighting all of your obsessions. Could you imagine for one moment just accepting, and then you've noticed that they don't last as long, or that you're not feeling as anxious or as distressed? Now, it's not as easy as how I explain it, but the way I'm saying it to you, I just want you to know that this is also an option. At some pathway in your healing and your pathway to wellness, you will notice that accepting certain obsessions will provide you much more comfort and relief than your usual resisting of them. Now let's look at changing ways that you can obsess. I'm going to give you some ideas. Mentally step back and acknowledge that you have just started to obsess. So that's becoming mindful of what's going on at that moment. Quite often, you don't realize that you may be obsessing for the last 1 hour, 2 hours, or most of the day. So as soon as you catch yourself out, mentally step back and acknowledge this. I want you to notice your emotional response to the obsession. Are you feeling anxious? Do you feel ashamed? Do you feel scared? Remind yourself that it's okay to have moments of obsessions. We all have moments of something. And when they're just moments, they're okay. It's when they become long-term and they cancel out your day and hijack your day that it becomes a problem for you. Reassure yourself at this moment that the obsessive content is irrational. Don't analyze. And one tip from me is, even if you don't truly believe it, still reassure yourself that at this moment, what you're obsessing about is actually irrational. Change your emotional response. In other words, write down your obsession instead of doing what you normally do, which may be rehearsing it over and over in your mind like a tape recorder. Perhaps even do something more creative or to break the pattern and sing out your obsession. What you're wanting to do is change the picture. Make any change to interrupt any pattern that you're used to doing, just so that your brain can be experiencing something different, so that you can help to rewire eventually this thought process into a much more healthier pathway. Letting go of your worries and your tensions. Decide to stop the intrusive thoughts or images. Making decisions like this helps you to feel much more empowered. Reinforce your decision with positive statements to yourself. Perhaps self-affirmations may work for you. Practice some brief anxiety-reducing relaxation techniques. I like to say always practice your relaxation techniques whilst you are calm so that you can learn them unconsciously. And then when your body or your mind feels the need that you need to calm down, you already possess the inner resource because you've practiced it whilst you've been calm. Shift your attention towards a new activity. This is really important because once we find we're stuck, the smartest thing for you to do is change your focus and focus on something else as fast as you can and as best as you can. Allow for error. You will not be able to do this successfully every time, but the fact that you try, this is what's important. Perhaps you might find it important to set yourself some worry time. Maybe one worry period during the day, at night, for example, before you go to sleep. You may find that you need 2 worry periods per day because you're so used to worrying at the beginning part of the day as well. So it's okay to decide what's going to suit you best. You may choose 2 worry periods a day for 10 to 15 minutes each. Spend all of that time worrying as best as you can. Don't even try and think of anything positive. Allocate that worry time as your sincere time for essential worry. Do not try and convince yourself that your worries are even irrational. If necessary, repeat the same worries again and again until the worry time is over. What we're doing here is containing your worry and giving yourself permission to worry. Try to become distressed even whilst you are worrying. This is one of my favorite teachings from Reid Wilson, because one thing that I've been taught is that distraction and avoidance is definitely not the way to go. And I know that when I have spoken to a number of different clients, I often ask, what do you usually do? And most of the time, there's distraction and there's avoidance. And when I do ask, and has that worked for you? Quite often the answer may be sometimes. But the truth is, most individuals who are trying to distract and avoid are experiencing anxiety for many years. So doesn't it make sense then that that's obviously not going to work long term and maybe not even short term? So what Reid teaches is face it, be with it, feel it, overindulge in it, and allow your distress to dissipate by itself whilst you're actually safe. There's a part of your brain that realizes that whilst you're obsessing or you're stressing or you're experiencing extreme anxiety, you're not under threat. You're actually safe. And this is why this technique works really well. Record and practice brief obsessions. Write down the words, the phrases, or the sentences of obsessive thoughts, exactly as they spontaneously come into your mind. Record it anywhere between 10 seconds to 3 minutes. Listen to this recording daily on repeat for 45 minutes or longer, attempting to become as distressed as possible by the message. Continue practicing each day until your distress has decreased significantly. Again, see how I'm emphasizing and encouraging as much obsession as you need to and as much irrational thoughts as necessary. This is critical to your pathway to wellness. Now, record and practice an extended obsession. Write out a detailed story of the feared event in the following way. Imagine you're in the middle of a spontaneous obsession. Write a moment-by-moment description of the exact words and pictures that come into your mind. Give as many details as possible about the setting, your action, the responses of others, and especially your emotions. Read your story aloud several times to rehearse the tone and the pacing that best reflect your emotions within the story. Record your story via audio. Each day, listen repeatedly to the audio for 45 minutes or longer. Could you imagine anything worse? But believe me, this is real fast track out of the obsessions. Attempt to become as distressed as possible by the story. Practice daily until you no longer feel such discomfort. It's like you become immune to it. It's like it no longer has that same effect on you that it did when you were first doing it, and that you will no longer have that feed relationship, that emotional charge that you normally have. That will weaken and that will almost disappear. Repeat this process for each additional obsession. So now it's time to modify your ritual. Postpone it, you can slow it down, you can change some part of it, or you could add a consequence to it as well. Now, components of treatments for rituals. Exposure. Staying for longer periods in the presence of a feed object or a feed situation that evokes any distress at all. For example, actual contact with contaminants, if you distress catching something via germs, or touching door handles or toilets, etc. Imagery practice, mentally visualizing oneself in the feed situation for visualizing their consequences, for example, driving on the road and hitting a pedestrian. If, for example, that is one of the thoughts that are tormenting you. Ritual prevention, refraining from ritualistic behavior. For example, leaving the kitchen without checking the stove, or touching the floor without washing your hands. Habituation, reduction of fear during prolonged or repeated exposure to a feed object or situation. So there you have it. Following these different tips and strategies are a pathway for you to stop obsessing. It's a pathway for you to break those habits, those rituals, those thoughts. And what I've described to you, I have found to be extremely powerful, extremely effective in treating obsessions and compulsions. And of course, I've described it to you in a nutshell. And for someone who is experiencing obsessions and compulsions, can find it so difficult to listen to and to see that there's actually light at the end of the tunnel. But there is. My advice to you is to do it. It is something that you can do as self-treatment at home, but it's also something you can do with a trusted therapist, perhaps even a trusted friend that you can share your goals with, and so you can keep yourself accountable, or you can help someone to stay on top of you. And so good luck, and I hope you found this psychoeducation useful. My name is Amanda Dunas, and I'm from the Positive Thinking Clinic. Thank you.